September 14, 2025, Sunday, 7:56 a.m. Early. This little talk here is going to examine a couple of things, then head towards the idea of a projection of what's going to be coming out of our event stream in a broad fashion. It's not possible for me to do my old-style reports. I can't get any detail because of the intrusion of AI and the government and censorship and all of this kind of stuff, right? All I can do is the broad trends anymore. And those are being done at an emotional content level, not a meme-specific or thought-specific kind of content. So it's much more about the rising and falling emotional tension. Anyway, so I had some data from last year that I ran and collected data all the way up through January, into January, and ran some projections, put a series of charts together. I put one out on X recently, and something that I'd always wondered about when I saw this pre-April, because the charts were done in March, I think, late February or early March. I'd have to go back and check the file date. And one of the things that I kind of wondered about was this big spike in building tension that begins on the 1st of October. Made no sense, right? If it was going to be financial or whatever, it should be a little bit into the first week, but not on the first, unless coincidentally the first happened to line up with specific days and other events, which it did not. And so I couldn't really figure it out. The jump was quite sizable, much larger than we've seen in the past in terms of the emotional tension numbers than had occurred around financial stuff. So it didn't really look to be 100% financial. I figured, well, it could be political, it could be any number of things. This is not that far off at the moment. And I'm actually thinking it relates to the 3IATLAS and the idea of aliens. And I'll get into that in a minute. Okay, so to set up a perspective here, let me note some things, okay? We have people like myself saying we live in an ontology. We have people saying we live in a simulation. And then we have the vast majority of people that are saying we live in a gritology. The idea of the gritology is that if all consciousness goes away, the dirt remains, you know. In either the ontology or the simulation theory, that's not true. If all consciousness departs from this universe, the universe collapses and disappears in total, right? Because in both of these ideas, our universe is constructed within a mind, within a consciousness, if you will, right? And so in the ontology, that is the supreme, which is just our way of saying el bigo, el grande, supreme consciousness, right? And a supreme consciousness can easily be understood as God. I have no problem with that. However your definition of God is, you have to include some of the ideas that make up the actual functioning. I'm approaching this from a functional viewpoint. So not a religious viewpoint, not a worship viewpoint, none of that. Just, you know, mechanistic. How does this shit work? And entirely forthright, saying it's for personal reasons, right? I'm not trying to take over the universe or any of that. I want a little floaty RV so I can go truck around and see what's in Antarctica and go visit some people in Switzerland and stuff, right? And I hate road trips. In any event, those. So you can easily see the ontology is supreme consciousness. It is supreme consciousness, however you want to define that, right? In a simulation theory, it is essentially the same thing. The simulation theory, on the other hand, believes this is being done within some form of a machine, some form of a mechanism, and that within the simulation, there is a real reality on the other side of the simulation. Sort of like a bunch of people sitting in a room drinking their coffee, you know, their stomachs are churning, they're watching computer programs, fiddling with keys and stuff, and we live in the computer program that those guys are monitoring. That's the simulation theory. I don't give it much credence, but all of the stuff they're attributing to the idea of the simulation theory really, in my opinion, is pointing to their seeing the more mechanistic aspects of how the supreme consciousness is running this ontology. Okay, so this is also encapsulated in many religious traditions. You can go back to the Ethiopian Jews, you can go back to the Hindus, you can go back to people in the isolated regions of the South Pacific who had very little direct contact, as far as we know, with other religions and developed basically an ontology religion. And and you see it in Shinto, you see it in Zen's not a religion, in my opinion. It's a process and that kind of thing. But you see it in Taoism, you see it in the ancient Chinese text, the Confucian, as well as to a great extent in Confucianism, right? So the idea is all over, all right? They phrase it differently and so on. Western religions have a tendency to understand the idea, but they say that they see it more like a simulation where our reality is out here and there is a supreme consciousness or a God that is external to that reality, right? And in a sense, that's accurate. But we are internal in the ontological or the simulation idea. We are internal to the supreme consciousness. And the Hindus had this idea that Brahma, their ultimate God, he'd go and take a nap. There's nothing going on, right? He's a little bored. He goes, he takes a nap. He dreams, and all of us come into existence. Whole ages, infinite time comes into existence in the form of his dream. And then at some point, episodically, periodically, Brahma wakes up, the dream goes away, we all disappear, and then he lays back down, and they redreams a new existence into coming into existence, right? A new reality coming into existence. So that was that idea. All right. So the point of this is that absent the Gritology view, which was adopted by the Jews and informs their religion, and to some great extent also informs Mohammedism with this restricted view of the Gritology. Anyway, so absent that, basically all of these other approaches are encapsulations of some of the idea of the ontology, including the simulation theory. And I can debunk the simulation idea in a lot of different ways and point to stuff that really directs it back to an ontology. Okay, now, the point of all of that is that from an ontological viewpoint, if you take that as your jumping off, which I do, right? So I don't take Gritology, I don't take the Gritology view, solid matter, any of that is my stepping off point for thinking about anything. I take the ontology view, right? And so in that view, there are no accidents and there's no meaningless coincidences. So every coincidence has vast ripples of meaning depending on who is seeing it and so on and when. And so you might read about a coincidence that occurs and find great meaning in it 60, 80, 100 years later, that sort of thing, right? And lots of conspiracy theories are crafted around a coincidence that people find meaningful. And sometimes they're able to suss out other material. They craft a conspiracy theory, and it ends up having meaning for the rest of us as well. And it was all because they found these coincidences to be not random, to be interrelated, etc. People are now dealing with this with the recent events and the unraveling of all of the story, the disparate threads of the thinking on it, all of that kind of stuff. I don't involve myself at that level because there's nothing in there for me. I find it to be a distraction, especially at this particular time. Not deliberate, right? We live in an ontology, so this is a part. Everything is a part of everything else within the ontology, and everything is springboarding on everything else in the process of creating more and more complexity. Okay, so now what I want to talk about is the changes that have occurred relative to space aliens, 3IATLAS, and all of that. And I'm seeing this from an ontological viewpoint, which is why I bring it up, because I will dispute a lot of the stuff that people have from a Gritology viewpoint. Even if I agree with what their main premise is, I will dispute their conclusions because they will have a tendency, and I'm talking astrophysicists, etc., very knowledgeable researchers, they will have a tendency to fall back into the Gritology viewpoint and dismiss a lot of things, where I'm going to accept those things and add them to a continually forming, continually refining picture of what's going on without putting any emotional attachment to them, right? So I'm not going to try and build a narrative and add emotional attachment to it. I'm going to try and build a narrative description of what's happening now. And then as items come in or are proven to not be accurate in my interpretation of them at that moment, I'll let them fall off and see what else comes in, right? I'm egalitarian. I'm open to what is actually materially manifesting in this regard. Now, 3IATLAS is changing. It's like nothing else we've ever seen. Assuming, okay, now there is that one caveat, right? And that is that we have to believe, we have to accept that the instrumentation that is available is indeed reporting this shit as it has been fed out to us. I have a tendency to think that there is some truth to that the information had been coming out accurately. This idea of mine is reinforced at this moment because now a lot of the observatories are being locked down on what they can report about 3IATLAS. And by the way, we've got this new comet, Swan 25, that just popped in. So there's various reports about 3IATLAS that are now interesting to say the least, okay? They're saying it changed color. That's significant. Because of what happened and how rapidly. Change of color. There's now reports that there are between 3 and 5 objects that appear to be orbiting it as it's moving. There's reports of 3 objects, orbs or whatever the fuck, over Mars that are now forming themselves in a triangle and maintaining that triangular relationship in the sky. I think this would be the 4th day they're reporting that, all right? There's reports of 3IATLAS change in direction, which theoretically is going to put it closer to Mars. And some people are saying could potentially impact, okay? It's also had change in speed, which means, and that change in speed seems to indicate it's slowing down. And also, you'll see some people that are saying that the change in direction is going to take it back to Earth. I don't know that that's the case. I don't have an observatory. I haven't seen the plots. I could discern that if I thought that the information was accurate and real. I'd be able to ascertain whether or not that appeared to be the case, right? That indeed, was it a situation of deviating apparently towards Mars, but with the idea of hooking around back towards Earth on our next revolution, which would be next year in this area of space, right? We can't validate the objects that are theoretically orbiting it. We can't validate any of it because we don't have any of this gear, right? We have to rely on officialdom for this. All right, so let's say that now I'm taking this from an ontological viewpoint. I take some of this stuff seriously in the sense that our universe is designed, in my opinion, to test the idea to test the idea of novelty. Can novelty exist? And that the way that it's approaching it is through an increasing level of complexity. And thus, in my opinion, in my thinking, things like 3IATLAS are there to push along in those main themes, so to speak, right? So it seems perfectly logical under this understanding that 3IATLAS is non-human intelligence, that it is directed, controlled, right? Not necessarily inhabited. It could be what we think of as AI controlled. In fact, that makes a lot more sense if we assume that its presumed trajectory is accurate, right? It's so long in transit from Sagittarius B, that the idea is absurd that there would be living creatures in there, that any individuated living creature would deliberately put itself in a container and shoot itself in all of its future generations towards Earth, right? It doesn't make any sense at all. There's no validation for it. You could see it if you allowed for the space aliens being under extremists. You know, they had to evacuate, right? Their planet was going to explode or whatever the fuck. Or they were being invaded and they all had to leave and it's a remnant of their civilization. One of these like really extreme situations, you could see that sort of thing. But the idea that any civilization or species would survive that kind of long haul is absurd. I mean, they're really risking it, right? So we might get 3IATLAS here. It might be filled with a bunch of dead aliens, as far as we know, in a rocket or in a interstellar device that is under AI control. That last part I actually expect to be more valid, more potentially true than any other aspect. So if we find out that if officialdom ends up, and who knows if officialdom is going to do this, if officialdom allows that this 3IATLAS is factual, it's real, it's not a comet, it's some form of a device. If that is the case, then there's all kinds of thinking, you know, it's a device that from a blown up civilization all the way down to a device deliberately sent to destroy all humans because our radio chatter annoys them, who knows, right? Or for whatever reason. So we could think of it as malevolent, but we don't have to. But I would certainly figure that if that basically, no matter where it came from, it's going to be under automated control. And I would doubt very much that there was any life form in it that would be recognizable as life to us. You know, in terms of individuated, you know, self-determining, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you could postulate that it is inimical, it's bad for humans in a number of different ways. It could be a bomb or any number of things. It could arrive here and open up a giant portal, and then the Draco reptilians pour through and they, you know, come and eat you and roast your liver, that kind of thing, right? You know, there's not a lot to suggest that any of that kind of shit is factual. Now, there are some things we have to worry about, in my opinion, right? Regardless of whether or not it is intended, it might, okay, assuming that 3IATLAS is indeed some form of a device, I would think that we would have to worry about such things as EMF, right? Whether deliberate or accidental, the thing could have EMF in the process of slowing down, and that EMF could distort our minds. Okay, we've recently seen that the government is experimenting, so the conspiracy guys are saying that the government is experimenting with memory and mind distorting EMF in concerts for young people, that they're wiping their recent memories and stuff when they go into these concerts. And I have no reason to doubt it. I know that there was a flurry of investigation into the idea of electromagnetic pulsed energy coming through your skull and distorting your memory, right? Disconnecting the function of the and the contents even of hormone-producing glands. I won't go in that tie you to memory. Okay, so that's how they're doing it was with the pulse stuff. Now, the supposition, the suggestion that this is happening as a test case in concerts seems to be reported or supported by reports on the internet after some of these concerts that kids are saying, wow, I don't remember fuck all, right? Not for the last 2 weeks. And it's not in the one, you know, they're saying basically, oh, this must be what headbangers feel like, right? And it may be indeed what headbangers feel like, and it also may be quite deliberate on the part of parties for whatever fucking reason. You know, why don't they stop the chemtrails? you know? So they don't want to stop the chemtrails. Who the fuck owns the giant drones that can hover for 5 days, not need refueling, and stand there absolutely stock still, 800 feet up in 100-mile-an-hour winds? And then they don't tell us shit about this. So this reality that we're in spite of the fact that it's an ontology, is polluted by the gritology people that are trying to fuck us all over. The gritology people, in my opinion, are very desperately afraid. That's why they're doing a lot of this stuff, right? Because their understanding and their control system is breaking down as a result of all of these different kinds of things, none of which they can stop, but they think they can because their views are so limited. Their understanding of our reality is so limited, they think they have far more power than they actually do. In any event, okay, so we have to watch out for EMF from 3IATLAS passing through, whether or not it decelerates, right? So as of October 3rd, it's no longer visible to us. And if the recent course corrections and speed changes were to be projected as being part of a whole series of maneuvers of its trajectory, then you can postulate that it's going to slow down on October 21 on the other side of the sun when it's closest to Mars. It's interesting. We have all the cameras and shit at Mars, supposedly, so we'll see what they get. Anyway, things are picking up, right? And we'll see a lot more of this a lot more information about this. Okay, so we have to also bear in mind that one thing we have to worry about at this stage, I mean humans, we have to worry about government, okay? Because, in my opinion, all of the 3IATLAS stuff, and now the Atlas and Swan 25 something, 25B or G or something, all of that stuff is easily manipulated by government for control purposes. And we are seeing a cross-government, like many governments are now dealing with their science institutions freaking out about and leaking information out about 3IATLAS. We haven't seen much about Swan yet, but that's just coming out. It's just appeared. So we'll see how these things go. I'm expecting actually, all right, so there's a possibility that we'll see a social thematic shift. Okay, I don't know what language to really use for it. But leftists are getting all kinds of shit now, as they rightly should, for celebrating assassination. That's going to continue. The success of it is going to pile on with itself. It's not going to be that short-lived. They may, I'm expecting, not necessarily organized, but a natural response on the part of people that are endangered by their previous language and so on, who can see them writing on the wall, those that are not vaxxed out of their ability to think. I expect those people to actually get a little bit paranoid, and it would make sense that some of them would pile on to the 3IATLAS equals aliens, or the 3IATLAS Swan equals aliens, or something like that, right? Just as a diversionary thing. Don't think about me, think about the aliens, right? Don't think about what a shit I am, think about the aliens. And so that may indeed be part of what's going to be coming on up. Therefore, there would also be a legitimate counter-reaction on the part of people on the right saying, oh, it's a diversionary tactic, don't pay any attention to 3IATLAS or any of this other shit. And we also would know that that would suit government because they seem to be shutting down. We don't have a whole lot of confirmatory things, but the data stream about 3IATLAS is drying up very rapidly from officialdom. And so there seems to be some level of caution. I don't know if it's concern or whatever, okay? However, so government, though, can use the idea of 3IATLAS and all kinds of weird shit in space, all the way down to the impact on the, from the Voyager series and so on. They can use all of this to their advantage, and I expect them to in 2026 as a control mechanism, right? I expect that we will have these kind of responses from government about something in space, which none of us guys will be able to validate, but there does appear to be, independently, if you really research it, and that's a lot of work, so most people won't, there does appear to be factual things happening independent of each other. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean it's all, that it's not organized, that it's not a psyop, okay? It could easily be a psyop and the government's on the other side of it. The CIA is tweaking the data so it goes into the machines and makes these people think that kind of thing, right? Or not the CIA, but whoever the fuck, right? So they could be receiving data. They're just looking at data coming in on screens. They don't actually have binoculars looking at the fucker, right? So it's not like anybody's seeing it with the naked eye. And so we have to trust the data, which these days the word trust, it doesn't exist in regards to me and anybody out of any institution. I don't give a shit whether the institution claims not to be government or not, right? It cannot be government and still 100% funded and controlled by them. And I can't tell the difference, so screw it. I'm concentrating on a few things from an ontological perspective. From this ontological perspective, some things make sense. That because of the nature of the growth because of the nature of the way complexity grows into greater complexity, I'm expecting that 3IATLAS is really factually not a rock, not accidental, not a meteor, none of that shit. That everything that we seem to that it seems to be doing, from which we take the idea that it's intelligently controlled, I think that's factual. I think it is intelligently controlled. I do not think that there's aliens in it, but obviously if it's intelligently controlled and constructed, it wasn't done so by humans. As far as we know, we can't be that easily deceived in terms of this kind of stuff. So it would be extra solar system, outside of our solar system, that it was constructed. There's a couple of scenarios I've seen where they say that, where the astrophysicists are saying that, if it came from the far side of Jupiter at this particular time, it could come around and make us think that it was coming out of a galactic center, but still very difficult to do. And there would be some levels of residuals in the solar system that would tell us, okay, not like waves or anything, but sort of like distortions that could be used. Okay, so I'm expecting government in 2026 and maybe early 2026 to start using this kind of stuff for their agenda, right? For the hidden agenda, all of that kind of chemtrail, mind warping, all of that kind of stupid shit that they're doing. And that's because these guys are working from a perspective of the gritology. It dominates their thinking. Therefore, they don't see their own actions participating in their own problems now and in future lives, okay? So they don't have a concept of themselves outside of their meat sack. And that makes these guys stupid and dangerous. And they do stuff. Okay, so I think that they will use these for their own agenda. I see it as happening in 2026. There's a big problem in 2027 that is energetically comes in, well, probably at the very last days of 2026, but it occupies January and February in 2027. Then there's a slight lull, and then we pick it up again in June of 2027. Those are those months out there in my system from data that was at the end of 2024 and into 2025. So relatively current. That data suggests that we're going to have a huge emotional impact in this period of time, right? The sag down here is still at levels that are far over what we see in 2026 and are far over what we've got in 2025. So we're on an escalating emotional tension curve that I would say would fit if aliens were appearing. There are some things that you can predict about aliens, right? Appearing, right? That the government is going to freak out about them, regardless of whatever the situation. They don't want humans to interact with them. We've seen that for 60 plus, 70 plus years in the current officialdom. So you can make all these projections of a past behavior by these people as to their future response. So should such a thing occur as, provable non-human intelligence design devices appearing. There's so much out in the woo world that does prove all of this that it's like, I'm nonplussed about it. It's like, I don't care. It's good unless they're, Heidi says, unless they're showing up for dinner and she can actually see them, she's not going to take them into her thinking. And I agree with her at that level, right? But the thing for me is I am certain that government is going to freak out at some point. I think it'll occur in 2026. And I think that, and they'll freak out because they will come to the understanding that 3IATLAS is non-human and it's a device. And so therefore could have beings in it or whatever the fuck, right? Something will make government freak out and they will use the presence of 3IATLAS, or their reactions will show that they are reacting to its presence. And they're going to really lose their minds because aliens means no control. So humans will naturally, in my opinion, act with each other against an outside species threat. Let's say 90% of the humans would come together around their political differences and around their religious differences to react to an outside threat. But government's intrusion in that process is going to be quite complicated. Okay, not complex, but complicated. And there's a big difference because they're going to pile on shit that need not be there, and it's going to make the life of government, the short life of government, more difficult than it need be, right? And without their piling on these complications, the complexity in which they're involved would be a little bit easier to get out of. I think it's going to be very difficult for government to get out of this the complexity issues. Their thinking is going to be quite odd and off relative to what's actually going on. But of course they have to. Okay, so if they're space aliens, government can't have open interaction between you and space aliens for any number of reasons. Disease, mind disease, warping the human mind, who the fuck knows, right? So they would say that if Kash Patel was walking down the street with his bodyguards and everybody was suddenly confronted with a space alien, Kash Patel and all those bodyguards would have to be isolated. Okay, the mere fact that that space alien got within 6 feet, 10 feet or something of them means in government's mind, in government's paranoid mind, he's contaminated. His mind's been changed. They came down and they altered his thinking. So no matter what Kash Patel said after that, it would be suspect. This is the kind of shit we're going to get into because of the way that government has to think about these things, because the first and foremost rule of government is self-preservation. And that self-preservation frequently means they have to do nasty things to the citizens in order that the government itself will prevail. And that's what they figure is their prime and best use of their time in this existence is keeping government there. Okay, they see it as this great thing. Anyway, so government's going to have this freak out at a contamination level, and I think it's going to reach the contamination level of the mind, right? So they're going to be worried about the space aliens altering human thinking, specifically your thinking. And what are you going to do? Holy fuck, right? You're no longer under human control. And in fact, you might be contaminated. And so, maybe we'd better put you into the contaminated by aliens camps. Who knows how extreme it's going to be, but they will seriously freak out. They will also amplify their freak out because there will be so many agendas being run by so many different subsets of government for their own purposes. waste of time in my opinion and stuff. But anyway, so this is kind of what I'm expecting over the next little period of time. We'll know a lot more about the shape of this and which of these various different threads may pop off, and we'll know that for sure, early part of December, right? When they think that 3IATLAS should be making its appearance around and so on. And there's any number of things that could be going on. I wanted to note something, though, that some of the things being reported, and they're reported as meaningless or not easily found meaning within them by the mainstream. And one of these things has been the recent color change in 3IATLAS to this particular shade of green. And human eye sees green better than any other color. Okay, we've got more receptors for discriminating on green shades because it's necessary for us because we eat vegetables, right? And we live in a world populated by plants, many of the plants can cause you problems, either skin irritations or outright poisoning. So, and also many predators hide within the dense green stuff. So our eyes are very well attuned to green. Green is also shown or discussed in books in like the late 1950s out of the Soviets, when this particular guy was doing some work with various different concepts for space. He'd been in jail, he'd been thrown in jail, and he came up with this idea that, oh, well, if you were a civilization and you were going to do things across space, it would have to be automated. He had no concept. This is late 1940s, he started thinking about this, writing it down. And this is Kozyrev, and he's doing some thinking about these things. And he was an astrophysicist, and he says, well, going from star to star is a long haul. So you'd send a machine. They were getting into robotics and that kind of stuff early then. And he was saying you'd send a machine, and how would you do it? And then one of the things he came up with was the idea of a reversible process impulse engine. And in his mind, it would use cyanide because of the complexity of the cyanide molecule, would allow you to disassemble or at the beginning, you'd fire off from whatever your planet with this big pile of stuff that you would then use in your impulse engine. And the molecular bonds would be ripped apart, the energy would be liberated, and you would be left with this material, which was hydrogen, carbon, and nitrogen in such a way that it became cyanide. And you just have this, and his idea was you just push this cyanide gas, the excess in your process of creating your energy, you'd push it out to the outside of your spaceship, let it freeze. And it would be a protective barrier against all kinds of things. And you'd only have to run your impulse engines, say, the first third of your journey, and you'd run them really fast at the beginning, and then they would slowly fade out, and then you wouldn't worry about it. And you've got your speed, and you just go with this automated device. And then at the end, some form of automation, he tied it to calendar clocks, would fire up, and it would use the cyanide gas, the frozen cyanide ice vapor, and it would suck that back in and use it to fire up the impulse engine, tearing those molecules apart to reproduce the original stock of material you started with, hydrogen, carbon, and nitrogen, and it would tear those chemical bonds apart and reduce the amount of cyanide around you, which had been your barrier against all these micrometeorites and shit. And in the process, you would glow brilliant green, okay, because of the cyanide gas. Okay, it would just illuminate everything. The process would be in your core in your device, but the light from that process of the destruction of the or the releasing of the energy via the molecular bonds would cause this great amount of light, which would go through the cyanide gas and would reveal spectrographically, but also to the visual eye, that it was being consumed in this process, right? And we see this. I've done welding, okay, and so you see this when you're doing welding. You'll see the hues of the various gases and so on. You got to wear breathing apparatus and this kind of shit for these various different kinds of advanced welding. I was just doing boat welding for my own purposes, but I got really deep into it because it was fun stuff to mess with. The electric arc, I was not a big flame guy. Anyway, so just that, right? It could be that it's using an impulse engine. If that's the case, there's any number of tells that we might even be able to see, even though it's on the other side of the sun. And then, of course, now you're left with the idea of, okay, let's speculate as to the why. Why are they coming here? What do they want? Et cetera, et cetera. And that's when humans are going to go batshit, trying to work all of that stuff out, right? Anyway, guys, so just this little bit of thinking, we've got ourselves a funny situation here, and I'm quite sure it's going to get funnier as we go along. Now, 3IATLAS may pass through our solar system, just like Oumuamua, which was definitely a device because it left the solar system faster than gravity could alone, solar gravitational sling could account for. And so it was definitely powered. In my opinion, right? Not that anybody gives a shit. Anyway, so it could pass right through the solar system, and then we're going to be wondering, okay, what the fuck was that all about? So anyway, I'll make another one of these in the future here.